Hello and welcome. My name is Victor Gijsbers and I teach philosophy at Leiden University in the Netherlands. In this video, I'm going to talk about the article Justification is Internal by Richard Feldman. And this is a companion piece to John Greco's article Justification is Not Internal, which I talked about in the previous video. These two articles are printed together in the book Contemporary Debates in Epistemology, 2nd edition, edited by Stoib, Turi, and Sosa. So in that book, every time there are sort of two articles arguing opposing positions. And so in this particular case, the opposing positions are whether justification is a purely internal matter or whether it's an external matter. And I set out the sort of framework of this debate in the John Greco video. So I'll take that as given and I'll dive right into Feldman's reply. Now, Greco in his article took a very strong stance. Greco said that there were no epistemic evaluations that were both interesting and purely internal. And so all that Feldman has to do is to show that there are some epistemic evaluations that are both interesting and purely internal. And he's going to take sort of the easy road of pointing out a couple of those early on in the article, but then he's also going to insist that there's actually one very, very important one, namely having good reasons that is both interesting and internal. And so he's actually going to end up agreeing with quite some of Greco's examples, but he's going to argue that those examples sort of don't show that there is no interesting internal epistemic evaluation. So, Feldman gives us quite a bit of background theory in his article. I'm not going to talk about all of that, but here is something that's very interesting. Two different kinds of analyses of knowledge, right? So suppose that we have something like knowledge is true belief. Right, knowledge is true belief. Well, that can't be right? Because I can just make something up, believe it, could be true, but it's not yet knowledge. Well, there are lots and lots of attempts to sort of explain what you have to add to true belief to turn it into knowledge. And Feldman is going to present to us two sort of approaches, right? Not two specific theories, more like two approaches. One approach is to say that what needs to be added are good reasons. Right? So what we need is not just true belief, but we need good reasons for having that belief. Right? That's what might turn it into knowledge. And good reasons, that sounds kind of internal. Right? That sounds like something I should know about. Right? If I don't know about something, it can't be a reason for me to have that belief. The other approach is to say, no, well, really what you need is some kind of causal relation with the world. Specifically, maybe a causal relation with the thing that you're supposed to know. Right? If I'm supposed to know that, I don't know. If I'm supposed to know that there used to be Romans here in Utrecht, well, it had better be the case that here in Utrecht, where I live, those Romans maybe left certain traces, like they left boats or pottery or weapons or inscriptions or something that through maybe a long causal chain going through some archaeologists and historians finally leads to my belief. Right? So there needs to be this causal chain in reality leading from the Romans to my belief. And it needs to be a chain of the right kind or something like that. And then, only then, does my belief count as knowledge. And when I just make something up, that causal chain fails. It's not there. So that's more externalist, right? I mean, you're really looking at the world and what's going on there and how it impacts me. Well, both of those analyses of knowledge run into trouble because there are all these famous Gettier counterexamples. But we can see them as approaches that you can recognize in many different theories. And a good first way, Feldman suggests, a good first way of thinking about internalism versus externalism is about thinking whether you are more thinking along the lines of the good reasons approach to knowledge or thinking more along the lines of the causal approach to knowledge. So, well, what the internalist then is going to say is that good reasons are very important. And one one term that we sometimes use to talk about having good reasons is this term justification. Right? So when Feldman says justification is internal, the title of his article, what he means is that having good reasons is internal. Now, Feldman completely agrees with Greco probably and lots of other people that justification alone is not enough to turn true belief into knowledge. And here's one way to see that. I could have good reasons to believe something and believe it, and the belief could be true, and it might still not be knowledge because my good reasons were actually not why I had the belief. Right? So suppose that I have really good reasons to believe that the Romans lived here 2,000 years ago, but I actually believe it because I just think it's cool. I'm just obsessed with Romans. I mean, I want to parade around in a Roman soldier's uniform like every day. And I just want to live somewhere where the Romans were. And that's why I believe it. So I have the good reasons, but I believe whatever I believe because of, something else, maybe wishful thinking or something like that. Well, that doesn't really sound like knowledge. Okay, at least according to many epistemologists. Well, there's a term for this. The term for a belief that is held because of good reasons it's called well-founded. And so Feldman says, well, it's absolutely true. Knowledge requires well-foundedness, not just justification, not just having good reasons, but believing because of good reasons. And maybe that's not purely internal, right? Maybe you don't always know exactly why you believe something. Right? Maybe that's the case. So maybe well-foundedness is not internal. Well, is that a problem? Is that a problem for the internalist? If it turns out that knowledge is something like well-founded true belief and well-founded is external, does that show that internalism is wrong? Well, no, Feldman says, because, believing because of good reasons still requires you to have those good reasons. So a well-founded belief is a belief that is justified and held because of those reasons that you have. And so justification is sort of in there. And so we can just agree as internalists that for knowledge you need justification and you also need this sort of extra added connection between your reasons and the belief. But the good reasons are still there. Right? That's going to be sort of Feldman's overall strategy to say that, whatever you need to add to knowledge, whatever you need to add to your analysis to have an analysis of knowledge, good reasons is going to be among them, and good reasons is going to be internal. Okay, that's the basic idea of the article. Good reasons are an essential part of knowledge, and so an epistemic evaluation that we are very interested in, and they are internal. One final preliminary that is important. Greco in his article talked a lot about being blameless or not being blameless. And his idea was that justification just is being blameless. Being justified is being blameless. And if you're not blameless, you're not justified. And he had these examples where somebody did something wrong in the past, which they have forgotten. And it means that they're not blameless about their belief right now. And so Greco says it means that they're not justified. Well, I don't agree with that, Feldman says. I think these are just two different things. When I talk about justification, I mean having good reasons, and I don't mean anything about blame. Right? So I'm not having a deontological sort of I'm not talking about duties, I'm not talking about apportioning blame. I'm talking about having good reasons. And so, actually, Feldman's answer to this case of the person who has forgotten where they got their belief from, even though they got it from somewhere bad, and they knew that it was bad at that time, his response to that is going to be, well, that person may not be blameless. He doesn't really have an opinion about that one way or the other, I think. Maybe that person isn't blameless. But they still have good reasons for their belief right now. Right? They have good reasons. They have, the best reasons. Not the best reasons maybe, but from their perspective, if they weigh up their evidence, they should believe this. right? If I seem to recall that Karl Marx started his life as a comedian and then got into philosophy because he wasn't funny, if that's something I just really seem to recall, in the same way that I seem to recall that the capital of Burkina Faso is Ouagadougou, or in the same way that I seem to recall that like when I lived in one of my previous houses, the front door was blue. In each of those cases, I have a good reason to believe it, right? Because those recollections are usually true. Not always, but they're usually true, and so it gives me a good reason to believe it. Okay. And so Feldman is going to say, well, even if you made this mistake in the past, where you heard a joke about Karl Marx being one of the Marx brothers, and you then formed a belief that Karl Marx was actually a comedian, you did something wrong then, sure. Maybe you're not blameless, but right now you have a reason to believe it, because you just have this recollection that it's true, which we'll use all day, all the time, to believe all kinds of things. Okay, so I've actually already talked about most of Feldman's arguments. Also, I suddenly have a tickle in my throat. When Feldman comes to the part of the article which is called Internalism Vindicated, well, the first thing that he does is he points out at some internalist epistemic evaluations, which are surely interesting, like whether my beliefs are consistent. Okay. Well, that's maybe something that's whether my beliefs are consistent. That seems to be pretty internal, and it seems to be pretty interesting. But okay. The most important thing for Feldman is this good reasons thing, right? That having good reasons is a part of knowing something, and having good reasons is purely internal. So Feldman spends a little bit of time thinking about whether somebody might claim that having good reasons, is actually external. He says, well, sometimes, for instance, we talk about knowledge without reasons, like the thermometer knows the temperature. Okay, but that's maybe sort of metaphorical. Right? That's not really the kind of knowledge that we ascribe to human beings. So, for human beings, at least, in the full-blown cases of knowledge, that's where we require reasons. And when we think about that, yeah, sure, we can agree, as I already said, we can agree with Greco, maybe, that our knowledge requires well-foundedness. But well-foundedness requires justification, and so good reasons are just in there. Now, maybe an externalist can come up with an account of reasons where having a good reason is something external. Right? Where, I could define a good reason as a reason that tracks reality or something like that. Right? A reason that would change if reality changed, something like that. I could do that, and then it would become something external. But that would be kind of arbitrary, right? We also have this internal idea of good reasons, and it seems to play a role in how we think about knowledge. And so the internalist, Feldman says, is quite right in insisting that this is important, interesting, and something that an internalist analysis is rightful. So that's Feldman's story. Again, it is centered on the idea of having good reasons, and the idea that that is both epistemically interesting and internal. And, that seems to make some sense. And I think that if the externalist sort of really wants to push against internalism, what they would want to do is they would want to get rid of this entire idea that good reasons are relevant for knowledge. Right? They would really want to say something like, if you have a theory that goes so far as to say that human beings are just these kinds of natural systems that have knowledge if they are in certain causal patterns with their environment, then maybe you can do without good reasons. And then you're sort of really hardcore externalist. Most of the, in my opinion, sort of more plausible epistemic stories that we could tell probably involve both internal and external elements. And so whether we want to call ourselves internalists or externalists, I mean, I don't know. I think that a lot hinges on exactly how you define it. The way that Feldman defines it, it sounds pretty reasonable to be an internalist to me. But it's a slippery debate. And you shouldn't assume that you know what internalism and externalism in epistemology mean before, in any particular article, you know how the author actually defines internalism or externalism. So you can check whether it lines up with the way that other authors talk about it. So, thanks for listening, and I hope to see you again with another video about another philosophical topic. Thank you.